This is the third part of my conversation with Angus Stewart about Han Song's Hospital, in which Angus shares his recommendations for other novels. Please let us know in the comments if you read any of these, or if you have any further recommendations of your own. Welcome to the third and final part of my discussion with Angus Stewart on Hospital by Han Song. We discussed the novel in some depth in parts 1 and 2, so if you didn't catch those, I do suggest you listen to them first. And in this section, Angus will give us some further recommendations on similar related texts. So maybe if we began the discussion by talking about Chinese sci-fi generally, we talked a lot about Three-Body Problem. Any other authors or novels you'd recommend from the Chinese sci-fi boom that's ongoing?
So many. I'll throw the question back at you, Ivan. What do you like in a story? And I'll see if I can pick you a personalized recommendation.
Ooh, well, when it comes to sci-fi, I'm probably on the soft sci-fi ideas side. But
Okay.
not, okay, going to be more specific, not too much of a naked allegory. I want it to be sort of obliquely come at something. How's
All
that?
right. I have just the selection for you. So there is I don't know if this is really attributed to more than one author, but modern Chinese lit has a super soft, a special term for super soft sci-fi called porridge sci-fi, and it's associated with an author by the pen name of Xia, who I've met in real life. I've met Xia. She writes, I guess, well, the stories I've read, and I think the one she's most famous for, they're very emotional, heartfelt. There's often family relationships or something bittersweet or touching. But she does get into either implications of future technology, or sometimes the stories can feel educational because they're laying out ideas like the Turing test and sort of setting it to a story. But the one I'm thinking of, I'm pretty sure it's called Tong Tong's Summer, but yes, it is called Tong Tong Summer. So it's by Xia, translated by our aforementioned hero translator, Ken Liu, who's
Mm.
translated books 1 and 3 of the Three-Body Problem trilogy. You can get this one online for free through Clark's World. It's also included in an actual book, a collection of translations by Ken Liu called Invisible Planets. So listeners could do much worse than buying Invisible Planets and enjoying that selection box that Ken Liu has
Mm.
translated and curated. But anyway, Tong Tong Summer does have a sort of a thematic connection with hospital, because it's about the memories from the perspective of a young girl called Tong Tong, remembering um, her relationship with her grandfather as he ages and needs more support to keep living his life happily and meaningfully. So this will might relate to our experiences as a child.
Mm.
And sorry to break it to you, it's hopefully going to relate to our experiences as an older person, assuming we can get some kind of care and attention. And it's sort of dealing with the population bomb that
Mm.
China is facing. Many countries are facing it. I
Mm.
think in East Asia, especially China,
Yeah.
South Korea, Japan, they're extreme examples where previous generations were making lots of babies, new generations aren't, whether it's because of things in China like the one child policy, or whether it's purely social factors like
Mm.
in South Korea. Or like here in the UK, it's coming as well because, I mean, take it from me, I'm 31. It's hard enough to get a house. Having the budget to have a child, never mind the 1.5 or however many,
Mm.
2 or 3, however many you need to produce to keep the population stable. It's coming from many countries where you have lots of old people, not enough young people to, one, have an economy that supports their care, or two, give them care. Because in the context of China, a lot of caregiving for the elderly is on the family.
Mm.
Granddad comes and lives with you. And in Tong Tong Summer, I think granddad can't live with anyone all the time. So there's a technological solution where a what we first think is a robot, but is actually a, I don't even know what the right word is for, sort of a machine that's controlled remotely, kind of prescient for what was coming years later in lockdown in a way.
Mm,
But a care worker is communicating or helping Granddad through this, and I'm calling him Granddad is right because it is a story that will make you cry unless you have a heart of stone.
mm,
This is a tearjerker, and yeah, it just sort of follows kind of like in a slice of life way, I suppose.
mm,
Tong Tong's experience of seeing Granddad and his relationship with this care machine. And I guess it does
yeah.
have some bearings on things that are going on in that part of the world. I
Mm,
think in Japan, there are robots that are companions or helping out with the
mm.
elderly over there. Oh,
Interesting.
I'm getting affected already. So, yeah, for a lighter touch, but no less meaningful touch, Shaja is a great soft sci-fi writer.
Okay.
I don't know what her output is these days. She is
Mm,
also a professor.
mm,
She doesn't just write lovely, tear-jerking, often kind of feminine stuff. She's a
mm.
serious person as well and a very smart person.
Right.
But the like very porridgey, soft, cuddly sci-fi
Mm,
can be found in China. She's an example. And she's sort of in a younger generation from Han Song, but
mm,
even now, a whole wave of new writers younger than her are putting out short stories that are not quite as grim as
mm.
those of Han Song and Liu Cixin. And many of them are women or even
Yeah.
non-binary. That's a new dimension of Chinese sci-fi
Mm,
that's unfolding.
yeah. And I suppose, I mean, there's so many, but if you were to just sort of, if you wanted to give people, okay, read, I don't know, three or four of the biggies, what other names would you put out there?
Okay, so I'll restrict myself helpfully to what's available in English. Um, I think again, I'm dating myself to when my fixation on this stuff started.
Mm,
I think the first, hmm, I think that there was an outlier, an Amazon Crossing translation of a novel by Wang Jingkan, who's a contemporary of Han Song and Liu Cixin. But if we don't count that, if we're talking about this post three body wave of authors who are you can find out lots of information about in English online. The first non-Liu Cixin novel that came out in that wave in English translation is called Waste Tide. It's by Chen Qiufan, who is what is he? He's maybe like about oh, I hope he's not listening and he's offended I get this wrong. I think his age is around 40, maybe either side of 40. So you know, he's a bit older than me, but not old enough to be my dad, put it like that. And Waist Tide is another Ken Liu translation. Chen Fan is also featured. I think there's two or even three of his stories in Invisible Planets. Ken Liu and Chen Fan are friends, basically international friends. And I think possibly it was Chen Fan that directed Ken to like look into um Three Body, possibly. So
mm,
he's sort of a part of this story of the boom, and he's one of the names that has been very active in getting his stuff translated or even just writing articles seemingly in English. He's
mm,
really interested in the international reception of his work, and in Waste Tide you really see that.
mm,
It's set in a fictional coastal town near where he's from in I think Guangdong province, where people I think are they called the in his novel they're the trash pickers. There's an economy based on like sort of dismantling or managing e-waste, electronic waste, which is
mm.
a real thing that was happening in a town not so far where Tencho Fam is from. I think Shantou is where he's from. And that might not be right. Somewhere
Mm,
one of the not one of the big cities in Guangdong province, but not like Shenzhen or Hong Kong. And a whole vortex of forces come together. Our main character is a Chinese American being brought in by an American company to sort of deal with I forget what the instigating incident is in this book, to be honest. He's in it. There's a AI entity in it. There are local gangs. Um, what else? There's a mecha machine. There's all sorts of stuff in this big swirl. It has a very international vision, but I think also like it's looking at linguistic diversity within China. There
mm,
are it pays attention to like local dialects or topolects, as Ken Liu would call them.
mm,
It doesn't feel like a lot of other Chinese lit I've read. It does feel like it has a sort of international vision.
mm,
I think he was very much inspired by William Gibson, Neuromancer. There's a Chinese cover of Waste Tide that looks like a slightly updated version of a very classic cover of William Gibson's Neuromancer. Again, it must be like 5 years since I read the thing, hence why I'm
mm,
failing to give you the specifics of the
mm,
plot. But it's one of the bigger name releases from novels that you can get from Chinese to English. Um, I'm trying to think of like a third leg of the tripod here because I've already talked about Liu Cixin
mm.
and previous. I've given you the Shaja and the Chen Fan recommendation. Another guy I met them at the same symposium. So if I can try and give one more, uh, hmm. Tell you what, I'm going to look at my back catalogue of episodes I did on Chinese sci-fi because both of these ones I've described there's episodes on my podcast about both of them, and I'm really just spoilt for choice.
I'm thinking of Hao Jingfang as another.
Yeah, she has a two novels out now actually in
Mm,
translation. A big favorite of Ken Liu.
mm,
Oh yes, but tell you what, never mind the novel. I'll go for another one that's probably another important leg of the Chinese sci-fi going global. She had a novella or a novelette, kind of like a very long short story called Folding Beijing,
mm,
which, like Three Body, won a Hugo, which is this one of these things that's nominally international, in effect is mostly American prizes. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. The Hugos are often wrapped up in controversies that feel very American, American culture wars. And the success of Folding Beijing and Three Body actually became, in the world of the Hugos, a mini culture war in themselves. But anyway, forget all that. Focus on the story. Folding Beijing takes place in an alternative future Beijing, where again, to sort of boost the economy, science fictional measures have been taken, where the city exists on three tiers, essentially a working class tier, where people, the shit jobs, basically the service jobs, a middle class tier, white collar jobs, jobs where you need a bit of an education, or at least you're in an office, and then the third fold in Beijing, which is like the ruling classes, the elites, business, politics, conferences, I suppose. And we follow a character who's from the underclass. He needs more money to send his kid to school or something. And like a lot of people in China, that is a hard scrabble. And he gets do this one job, get a big payment. And the job involves going through a secret path to the highest echelon. And the reason the city's folding is that the folds are in partly mechanical. The city adjusts itself, but it does it on the clock. So when all the underclass are on their working day, the other tiers of the city are on a different schedule. So let's say when all the workers are awake, the ruling class are asleep, and maybe the middle class are halfway through their day or something. And she does it in it the plot keeps moving forward. The characters are relatable, and it's just really interesting seeing how it's played out. It's quite well realized, but not exhaustively so, where it's all world building or exposition.
mm.
Some of it feels specifically Chinese. The rest of it, could be folding London, could be folding New York. Um, an interesting thing is it's more captivating than other stuff I've read by her. Her novel you can get um, in English, Vagabonds, is quite plodding. It's very interesting. It's quite plodding, And then I think there's a couple other short stories by her that don't have the same zing, but Folding
Mm,
Beijing, I would say, at least in translated Chinese sci-fi, is like an essential text,
mm,
along with Three Body Problem. It's probably the one, and maybe Waist Tide as well.
mm, mm.
So yeah,
Brilliant.
there's
Yeah.
lots more I could recommend.
Mm,
Deeper cuts. I've given you maybe the obvious ones, with the exception of Tong Tong Summer. Um,
mm,
but I just generally, if listeners want to get more of a selection box, there's lots of selection box collections of short stories. So Ken Liu has two, Invisible Planets, which I described, and another one called Broken Stars, which is sort of the same again, but with a slightly different selection of authors. Han Song is in both of them. Excellent, excellent choices, the stories in all cases. Another translator did something quite similar a little later on. A British Chinese author or translator, Xueting Ni Xueting. That's got an interesting selection. Han Song is in it. There's another one from an academic publisher, Columbia University Press, done by a range of different translators with a very broad palette of stories. That's called The Reincarnated Giant. Han Song is in that. The Han Song stories are excellent. Um, and there's more and more. There's a more recent one I've not read called The Way Spring Arrives, where every author and translator in that is female or non-binary.
interesting.
The
I wasn't aware
authors
of that.
definitely. I
Mm,
think the translators are all female or at least not male.
okay.
Certainly the authors are.
And sorry, what was
That's
the name of that collection again? I just missed.
the the way spring arrives.
Mm,
Although again, I've been out of the game so long, I'm gonna fact check myself. The way spring. Oh, the way spring arrives and other stories.
okay.
So Hansong is not in that. He doesn't meet the criteria. Um, and I've not read it, so I can't vouch
Mm,
for its contents. But what I can say is I don't know if Chinese sci-fi is in translation is in a boom stage, but what it is sort of normalized in publishing.
yeah.
Books like this are still trickling out. Liu Cixin, at least, he has sort of entered the canon of living Chinese sci-fi writers. I think if someone is a big sci-fi freak, they'll know him just as well as they know, say, Jeff Vandermeer or
Yeah.
that other guy who I can't remember. He's in there. He's gone global, even if the rest haven't. And
Yeah.
we're still seeing the after effects in things like the Netflix series.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
it's not the biggest show on Netflix, but it's there.
It'll
That's
be
not
interesting
nothing.
to see if we get more of that series and more of other stuff as well. Yeah. Let's hope so.
Yeah, I expect nothing is going to recapture the limelight, but again, I think things are going to keep coming.
Mm,
And, once a book is published, it's still available, especially in the age of ebooks. The
yeah.
library of this stuff for people that can only read English and not Chinese, like
Mm,
me, is getting bigger and bigger.
yeah.
So everyone is a winner.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that introduction to some of the big texts in Chinese sci-fi, and yeah, like I said, some of the lesser known ones as well, which I'll certainly check out. So, thank you very much for joining me. Been really interesting to talk to you, and yeah, thanks for introducing us to Chinese sci-fi and to Han Song's Hospital.
You're very welcome. May I give myself a plug? I meant to do this some point earlier and I totally
Absolutely, you
forgot.
can. Yes, of course.
All right. So the obvious one is my podcast. I think Ivan will have introduced it in the intro. If you want to browse the episodes, just search it in your podcast app or put into your internet browser trchfic.com. If you'd like to read, if you enjoyed my strange, meandering thoughts and would like to read them in written form on the Netflix Three Body and the books and the Chinese Three Body TV adaptation and a movie called Journey to the West, which is not about the Monkey King, but is a modern indie Chinese sci-fi film about science fiction. I kind of a strange man who ran a science fiction fanzine who goes on a quest from what is it, from Beijing to Sichuan. I wrote this long essay comparing this film and the American version of the three body converted to TV, and the domestic version, it's a real, I don't know, I don't think you could summarize it in any particular way. It's a big mess, just like my monologues in this episode. But that's called Alien Bless You. So I think if you go into Google or your Baidu search and you type in Alien Bless You three body, it should show up. It's on the Asian Child blog. If you're a big three body freak, then and you read it, you'll probably either like it or you'll be outraged. But I have to plug it because I why did I write this massive essay if no one's going to read it? So
Well, I read it and very much enjoyed it. I thought you made
yeah,
some great points, so I'm happy to recommend it, and
yeah,
won't edit your plug out. Don't worry. Happy
good,
to have
good,
it.
good. Yeah, glad the points are great and not just what's the word? Ambitious. If they're actually landing home, that's good. But yeah, and of course, listeners do read this stuff. Go out and read it.
Mm.
It's fascinating. And if Han Song's not your cup of tea, for every Han Song there are two Xiajas.
Mm.
Plenty happy stuff.
Okay, let's finish there. Thank you again, Angus, and thank you all for joining us on this episode on Handsong and Hospital.